In the 80s, one drug crew ran Queens like a Fortune 500 company, efficient, brutal, and untouchable. They called themselves the Supreme Team. In this video, we're diving deep into the rise and fall of Kenneth Supreme McGriff and the Supreme Team, how they built a street empire from nothing, ran it like a business, and left behind a legacy that still echoes in hip-hop and federal courtrooms alike. If you ran $1 million street empire in your 20s, would you go legal or double down when the feds came knocking? Comment below. Is street fame worth a federal sentence? Before there was a Supreme Team, there was the neighborhood, South Jamaica, Queens. In the late 70s and early 80s, this wasn't just another borough, it was a war zone of poverty, racial tension, and crumbling opportunity. Abandoned buildings lined the blocks like tombstones. Crack hadn't just arrived, it exploded. And in that chaos, a new kind of king was born. The streets raised hustlers, and the system fed them. In a place with no roadmap to success, young men made their own. Guns replaced resumes, and turf was more important than any diploma. That pressure cooker molded Supreme, and the team he would eventually lead. Kenneth McGriff wasn't born with power. He earned it the hard way. As a teenager, he wasn't flashy. He watched. He learned. He soaked up game from older hustlers like it was scripture. While others were chasing clout, Supreme was plotting moves. He started small, selling on corners, keeping his mouth shut, moving smart. He was quiet, calculating, and always 10 steps ahead. People noticed. And more importantly, people respected him. But Supreme wasn't interested in being a soldier. He wanted a crew, a system, something bigger than any one man. By the early 80s, Supreme made its move. He didn't just gather a group of hustlers, he built a machine. The Supreme Team wasn't just some street gang. It was a full-fledged organization, complete with lieutenants, soldiers, runners, and enforcers. Their headquarters, the Baisley Park housing projects. Their brand, ruthless precision. What made them different was their structure. Supreme modeled its crew after military and corporate models. Orders flowed down like a chain of command. Every man had a role, and any man who slipped, replaced. In a world of chaos, Supreme brought order, and that made them deadly. Supreme wasn't just pushing weight, he was running a business, and he treated it like one. He tracked inventory. He scouted competitors. He optimized the territory. His lieutenants weren't thugs. They were managers with assignments, sales goals, and expectations. And if you didn't meet those expectations, you didn't get a warning, you got dealt with. They moved product fast, cheap, and clean. While others were loud and sloppy, the Supreme Team was surgical. Customers felt safe. Workers felt protected. And enemies? They didn't last long. As the crew's power grew, so did their vision. They started reaching into new neighborhoods, spreading from Baisley to surrounding blocks, taking over corners without firing a shot. They didn't need to. Their rep walked in the room before they did. And Supreme? He began thinking beyond drug sales. He started investing in businesses, laundromats, car washes. He even toyed with the music game. That dream of going legal started to take root. But he was still knee-deep in the streets. The crew was generating hundreds of thousands a week. But that kind of spotlight, it draws the wrong kind of attention. The Supreme Team didn't just run on profit, it ran on discipline. And that discipline was enforced by muscle. You weren't just loyal because you were paid. You were loyal because you were terrified not to be. Supreme handpicked his enforcers, men who didn't flinch at violence and didn't hesitate to make examples. One wrong word, one rumor, one slip-up, and your name could be carved into the pavement. Loyalty was everything. Snitching wasn't just betrayal, it was a death sentence. That fear created a tight circle, a brotherhood of silence. And it worked, at least for a while. Most street crews were messy. The Supreme Team? They were organized warfare. At the top sat Supreme, the CEO and shot caller. Under him, lieutenants who ran specific territories. Below them, trusted foot soldiers. And at the bottom, young lookouts and runners getting their stripes. Communication ran tight. Money was accounted for. And the consequences were immediate. This wasn't just about selling drugs, it was about control. Supreme made sure his team didn't just serve him, they served the brand. Even their dress code, clean tracksuits, chains, polished kicks, was part of the image. Uniformity bred unity. Money flowed like water. At their peak, the Supreme Team was clearing 6 figures weekly. They drove BMWs, Mercedes, and customized Jeeps with booming systems. Chains were thick, rings were heavy. And Supreme? He wore silence like armor. He never flashed, but you felt his presence. That wealth did two things. It attracted admiration and triggered paranoia. When your whole block eats, the feds start to sniff. When you shine too hard, the wolves come with knives. Still, for the Supreme team, that lifestyle was the reward. The hood finally had royalty, and Supreme was the king. What separated Supreme from other bosses? He wasn't reckless. He had rules. No unnecessary beef. No public arguments. No talking on phones. No socializing with strangers. Every move was calculated, every action strategic. He enforced operational security before it was cool. He believed the less people knew, the less they could say. Supreme didn't need to yell. His silence said enough. Even within the crew, information was compartmentalized. You only knew what you needed to know. That's how they lasted so long undetected, until the wrong people started making noise. Every empire has weak points. For the Supreme team, it started with the younger soldiers. Some got sloppy, talked too much, spent too loudly, and moved without thinking. Then came the paranoia. Who was being watched? Who was wired up? Trust turned brittle. The feds started snatching guys up on minor charges, gun possession, traffic stops, and flipping them into informants. Slowly, piece by piece, the team's armor started to crack. And in the street world, betrayal doesn't come from the outside, it comes from the inside. By the late 80s, the DEA, ATF, and FBI were watching Queens like hawks. The Supreme team had made too much money, gained too much fame, and drawn too many enemies. Wiretaps, surveillance vans, undercover buys. The alphabet boys were circling, slowly building a federal case. They didn't want the small fish. They wanted Supreme. And that's exactly who started disappearing. Lieutenants, hitters, suppliers. Some flipped, others vanished, and a few were found in alleyways. The feds knew they had one chance to bring down a criminal empire. Supreme knew it too. In 1989, the empire finally cracked. Supreme was arrested and sentenced to a long stretch in federal prison. The headlines hit hard. This wasn't just another drug case. This was a takedown of one of New York's most powerful street figures. Locked behind bars, Supreme began reflecting, not on remorse, but on legacy. Word from the yard was, he studied law books, analyzed his case, and started thinking long-term. He wasn't done, just paused. Outside, the streets kept moving. The crew faded. New gangs rose. But Supreme? He was already plotting his return. When Supreme came home in the late 90s, things had changed, but he hadn't. The streets were different, but the game was still the same. This time, though, he had his eyes on a new empire, the music industry. Rumors spread like wildfire that Supreme was tied to Irv Gotti and Murder Incorporated, one of the hottest labels in hip-hop. Ja Rule was going platinum, 50 Cent was coming up, and Supreme? He was allegedly the silent partner behind it all. To some, it looked like redemption. To the feds, it looked like laundering. Supreme's second act was bold. He dabbled in film production. He allegedly advised artists. He rubbed shoulders with execs. He walked red carpets and whispered into boardroom ears. But street ties don't break easy. The feds were watching again. They believed Supreme never left the game. He just changed outfits. And when 50 Cent was shot 9 times, many in the industry whispered Supreme's name, citing an old beef and possible retaliation. No charges stuck, but the spotlight burned hot. His name rang louder than the music itself. The relationship between Supreme and Irv Gotti became one of the most controversial alliances in hip-hop history. Irv always claimed it was friendship, loyalty, nothing criminal, but the feds weren't buying it. They accused Murder Incorporated of laundering drug money through music and movies. The courtroom drama was intense, millions on the line, careers at stake. Supreme wasn't on trial, but his shadow was. Irv eventually beat the charges, but the damage was done. For Supreme, the streets may have respected him, but the system never forgot him. And that shadow would soon turn into a sentence. If you're still watching, you already know the story is deeper than drug dealing. It's about power, betrayal, and reinvention. Drop it in the comments if you think Supreme played the game better than most. And make sure you hit that subscribe button. We've got more real street legends coming every week. Don't miss the next drop. By the early 2000s, the streets were buzzing again, and so were the federal agents. The whispers of Supreme's continued involvement in drug trafficking and multiple murders were getting louder. This time, the feds weren't just aiming to disrupt his operations. They wanted him gone. In 2007, Kenneth Supreme McGriff was sentenced to life in prison without parole for ordering the murders of two rivals, Eric E. Moneybags Smith and Troy Singleton. The charges were serious, but the message was clear. The government was done playing with the Supreme Court. It wasn't just a conviction, it was a burial. They didn't just want to lock him up. They wanted him erased from the streets forever. Even behind bars, Supreme's name never stopped ringing. Rappers dropped his name in verses. Documentaries revisited his story. His influence seeped into hip-hop like ink into water, quiet but everywhere. From 50 Cent's rise to Ja Rule's decline, the echoes of Supreme's past played out like verses from a long, dark ballad. His story became a blueprint, a cautionary tale, and a badge of honor all at once. To some, he was a menace. To others, a martyr of the hustle. He blurred the lines between street power and cultural relevance, and in doing so became immortal in the minds of a generation. Kenneth McGriff's story is a crash course in the double-edged sword of street power. He built an empire with business precision. He ran the streets like a Fortune 500 CEO. He inspired fear, commanded loyalty, and wore silence like a crown, but that same power created paranoia. The streets that once praised him turned suspicious. And the system, once fooled by his silence, eventually buried him with receipts. At the end of it all, Supreme's rise and fall teaches one brutal truth. In the game of kings, the crown comes with a cost. Kenneth Supreme McGriff wasn't just a drug lord. He was a brand, a myth, and a business model. He showed the streets how to organize, how to scale, and how to rule without ever raising his voice. His empire wasn't built on chaos. It was built on calculated control. But even the smartest hustlers can't outthink the system forever. He played chess while others played dice, but the feds changed the board. From South Jamaica to federal lockdown, Supreme's journey is more than a crime story. It's a mirror, a reflection of ambition, loyalty, betrayal, and the weight of legacy. In the end, his story forces a question. What's the real cost of being supreme?